Now, once you understand how you can get the data from the MongoDB database using this get user controller, let's take a look at how we can post the data, or we can say how we can create a new employee. So just before this function, let me specify the endpoint path right here, and right down here, I'm going to do the same and specify the endpoint path, and this is a type of post request. So I'm going to say here post, and I'm going to make a request to these users. Just down here, I'm going to create a controller. So I'm going to say here export async function. The function name is post user, and then we need to pass request and response parameter, and inside this function here we need to add first try and catch block to try and catch the errors, and inside this catch here I'm going to say return response.status is going to be 404.json, and inside this JSON I'm going to return an error. So I'm going to return this error as a response from this function. Just out of that, inside this try, we need to first get the data from the user and then store that data inside a MongoDB database. To get the data from the user, you need to call request.body. Using this request.body, you can get the data from the user. So let me store this data inside a variable constant form data is equal to, I'm going to just store this data inside this variable, and then right down here I'm going to say if I don't have this form data, then I'm going to return a response. So I'm going to say here return response.status, which is going to be 404.json, and inside this JSON I'm going to return a response. So we pass here error form data not provided. That's upon you. You can specify any error inside this response. Just out of that, if we have data, then we can say here users, this user object dot create. This create method is going to create a new user and store that in the MongoDB database. This method is going to have two parameters. First is the form data, or you can say the post data, and second is the callback function. So as a first parameter, we pass form data, this variable, and as a second parameter, we pass a function. So we call here a function like this, and to this function, we can get two parameters, error and data. Now this function is only going to execute when the data is successfully inserted in the database. So here I can say return response.status, and status is going to be 200.json, and then I'm going to specify this data here, this one. And if you want, you can return this user. That's it. Now let me test this post request. Save the changes. Back to my Postman API testing tool. I already have this post user inside this API testing tool. So let me just insert this value inside my MongoDB database. So what we need to do is we need to first select the post HTTP request. So we first select that. Then the endpoint is going to be the same, localhost 3000 API users. And then we need to select the body. And inside this body, you need to select the raw data and select the JSON format. We are returning the data as JSON format. So we need to pass here JSON, and inside this JSON right here, I'm going to return this data to the post request. So I'm going to specify this object here and click on the send button. When I click on the send button, I'm going to get a response here, method post name post request. This is because in the index.js, I didn't call this post request. So at the top inside this import statement, we specify post user, copy this function, get rid of this response, and specify this function here. Don't forget to pass a request and response parameter. Save this file, back to the Postman API testing tool, and now when I click on the send button, you can see I'm going to get the response from the MongoDB database. Here I'm going to have all my data, but you can notice you will get ID with this data. MongoDB is going to create and specify unique ID to all its data. So this is the unique ID to this object. Now let me just make a get request and get this data from the get user endpoint. So I'm going to click on this get user and make a get request on this API users. When I click on the send button, you can see I'm going to get a response from the MongoDB database. And now if you want to add another record, you can just click on the post user, make a post request, and inside the JSON, you have to just replace this data with the new one. So inside this data.json file, as you know, you have the data of all the users. Let me copy this and specify that right here. And then I'm going to make a request. So when I click on the send button, you can see it's going to create this data and return a response. And now we go back to the get users, click on the send button, you'll get 2 records as a response. You can see. And now you can iterate over this array of object and display all your records in the UI.